Thank you all so much for being here this morning or afternoon, depending on where you're located in the country. We're so happy that you decided to join us for this wonderful webinar with Congregation Shaarei Tefillah. Thank you so much. So a couple things to go over really quickly. I'm going to launch a poll right now. And I invite you to please answer it at your convenience before we really get into the discussion. This will help us help our discussion kind of help us gauge where everyone's at as far as experience with solar. So if you're a beginner, someone intermediate, an expert, or a solar alumni, also known as a solar superstar, whatever you're comfortable with. So thank you for sharing that. We appreciate it. That'll help our discussion. I want to make sure you guys know that please drop any questions that you have into the Q&A section of the webinar. We will be answering those at the end of the webinar if we aren't able to do it during the discussion. So please stay tuned for the end of that. I also want to make sure everyone knows that this webinar will be recorded. So you will be receiving an email follow-up in the next couple of days with the webinar recording in case you missed something. We'll also be including all the contact information for our speakers. So thank you again for being here. We're excited to have you. So if you haven't had a chance, please vote in that poll that we have going on, and we'll be sharing that content with our panelists. So from here, my name is Lindsay Harmon. I am the marketing manager at Collective Sun. I'm the one who's been emailing you a bunch lately, and we're so glad that you're here. Thank you. I can click. Our two speakers for this webinar will be Michael Rubin, who is the head of the Solar Committee and past president of Congregation Shaarei Tefillah, and the Collective Sun's vice president of sales, Matt Brennan. So they're going to be the two that are going to be leading most of the discussion and talking about the experience going solar. So looking forward to that. They also invite, if you have any questions or want to contact either of them, please feel free to email or call Matt or email Michael. So thank you. Our agenda today will be quickly going over, so who is Jewish Climate Action Network? We'll have a little presentation from Rabbi Katie Allen about that incredible organization. We'll be talking about who Collective Sun is and what we do and how we can help you go solar. And then we'll be going into the detailed story of how Congregation Shaarei Tefillah went solar and their whole process, so and what they learned. And then at the end, of course, we'll have our questions and discussion. So looking forward to that. So at this time, I'm going to hand it over to Rabbi Katie Allen, who will be talking about JCAN. So thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Lindsay, and thank you so much for having me here today to speak a little bit about the Jewish Climate Action Network. So the Jewish Climate Action Network started 7 years ago in Massachusetts. We mobilized communities to take leadership in bold climate campaigns, and through education and reducing carbon footprints. Jewish Climate Action Network now has nodes in 3 other states, each one doing slightly different things. But here in Massachusetts, we work through education, activism, organizing to bring a visionary Jewish voice to the climate crisis. And one of the main things that we do is to help synagogues reduce their carbon footprint. We have a series of programs that do that, and to our delight, the people from Congregation Shaarei Tefillah were at one of our programs on Solar for Synagogue and learned a lot that helped them along their journey to becoming a solar synagogue. So we have, you can actually still see that, the video of that, requesting it on our website, which is, as you see here, jewishclimate.org, very easy. We are also going to be hosting a virtual conference on the 25th of April, which I invite you to put that on your calendars and watch for us. Together, we are basically working to try and repair the world in Tikkun Olam, the Jewish term for repairing the world, for which we're all responsible. but we're also concerned about tzedek, about justice, and about the fact that we need to be considering those people who are most vulnerable and who are most impacted by climate change. So if you're in Massachusetts, I invite you to join us. If you're in New York or Georgia or the DC area, there are also nodes there. You can find the links to those on our website as well. So I'm very excited to know that our impact on Congregation Shaarei Tefillah, and we can have that same impact on your congregation as well and get people there involved. So I'm looking forward very much to the conversation between Matt and Michael. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Katie, for that. It's awesome information. And thank you so much for the work that you do. We appreciate you. So next, I'm going to hand it over to our Vice President of Sales at Collective Sun, Matt Brennan, who's going to quickly go over what we do at Collective Sun. So thank you so much. Take it away, Matt.
I'm just going to spend, at most here 2 minutes just to describe what Collective Sun does, so everyone has, the same sort of starting ground and how we worked on this project. But at a very high level, Collective Sun, we help finance projects for nonprofits across the country. And when I say nonprofit, I use that word very broadly. We work with all types of tax exempt entities. So lots of communities of faith, synagogues, churches, spiritual centers in general, mosques. We've worked with all of those. We work, so far we worked in 19 states. And our only limitation with working in states is whether or not, the utility will allow third-party ownership. We have what amounts to a leasing model, or it's essentially a prepaid lease or prepaid solar service contract. But we're working all across the country. And again, our focus is on nonprofits. So I want to talk a little bit about what our particular kind of financing is. So Lindsay, if you go ahead and, yeah, thank you for doing that. So I mentioned all kinds of tax exempt entities. So I said communities of faith, but also that extends to HOAs and governments, schools, really anybody without a tax appetite, because as you'll see, our main involvement is really with the tax credit. All nonprofits, they don't have a tax appetite. So the investment tax credit that comes along with all these solar projects, that we're currently is a 26% tax credit that gets left on the table for all nonprofits. They don't have a tax appetite, so they can't use this tax credit. So that's where we come in. We have a program where we can use the tax credit and we pass through a discount. So that's what the congregation did. I'll talk with Michael more about that in a minute. They worked with us and we passed through a discount. We monetized the tax credit and they got a lower price. And they got a 12% lower price. And that required, for us to use the tax credit and pass through the discount, that, the IRS makes it so that we have to own the system. So we own the system and we're responsible for it. We own, operate, and maintain the system. We provide a production guarantee in most cases. And then we pass through that 12% discount. So, it's basically like a 12% off coupon for the nonprofit. Now, as Michael will tell you, there's more to it than that, of course. But in essence, it's a 12% off coupon. Now that leaves another 88% to fund. And a big question that every nonprofit has, every client we work with, is how do you fund that remaining 88%? And yes, some come to us and they already have cash reserves. They've already identified a lender, or they've raised donations. They've already overcome that, but not in all cases. So there are many ways to fund that 88%, and we can also help with that. We work with lots of values-aligned lenders, mission-aligned lenders, and traditional lenders to fund that 88%. So on the big picture here, there's a handful of different ways to fund that 88%. There's something called C-PACE loans, and we could talk. If anybody wants to call, we can talk about that. But that's a type of loan that's assessed on your property tax. We've done quite a few projects, through those lenders. We have a very good partnership. in that space. Of course, cash reserves and donations. That would be an obvious choice, but not everyone has that. Mission aligned lenders. As I mentioned, we have a list of values aligned and mission aligned lenders that we work with that are interested in funding these kinds of projects, and we're more than happy to make introductions to those lenders if anybody's interested. And of course, there's traditional lenders, lenders that you've worked with in the past. Lots of these, we've worked with many of them, and that's always an avenue to pursue. And a couple options, I think, and Michael and I will talk about this a little bit, is crowd lending, which is borrowing money from your community. And we are actually registered and licensed to do these kinds of transactions, and also working with impact investors. We're working with philanthropy and impact investors to raise money for these kinds of projects. And we're going to touch on that, and I'm more than happy to, we're also more than happy to make introductions when appropriate on those. So that's really Collective Sun, sort of the 2-minute overview. We provide a discount, we own the system, and the discount's 12% typically, and that 88% that still needs to be funded, we're happy to make introductions to help fund that. So with that, I want to move the conversation to talk with Michael about his project. And Michael was really the, as we refer to someone like him a lot, it's kind of the internal champion for Congregation Shaarei Tefillah. And he was the president, past president of the congregation. And he was really the head of the committee and the solar champion. So Michael, with that said, I'd like to introduce you. And if you could just say a little bit about yourself and about your congregation and really the story behind it, and how this all started.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Hello, everyone. I'm sorry that I can't see each of you in full living color. We'll look forward to a day when we can all either get together in person or at least one-on-one in person. A few words about our congregation. We are about 36 years old, 250 member families. We have a yearly budget on the order of about $650,000. We only have 2 full-time employees. So, in essence, we are a pretty small organization. The 2 full-time employees are a full-time rabbi and a full-time office administrator. So the takeaway from this, I think, for you guys is that we were able to, you could say, execute on a $160,000 solar panel installation, in essence, on a shoestring, and get great benefit as a result. We cover about 90% of our projected electricity needs per year. And so, the long story short, it's been a tremendous experience for us. We're 1 year in right now, so we have 1 year of experience under our belts, so to speak. The congregation, by the way, was founded by a group of people who were very interested in participation by the congregants. We are not a top-down kind of rabbinic-led organization where the rabbi tells everyone what the priorities are, and everyone just sort of does their own business. The congregation is quite active in all aspects of the business, all aspects of the congregation, driven by the need, of course, because we're not the largest in the world, but also by the interest in people actually taking action along a variety of areas. Matt, anything that I've left out?
No, that's a great background. A question that comes to mind is if we want to talk about just the process of doing this. When did you actually start? Now, it went live in December of 2019, but when did you actually start the process? What was that, and when was it?
Right. We started the process, and by the way, there's a shout out for Bob Clark of 621 Energy, our contractor, who I believe is part of the webinar. And we started the process, I want to say, more than a year and a half before that. we were prompted to go down this road by a member, Jay Sage, who I believe is also on the webinar right now. Jay came to me and he said, you know, I just came back from a Jewish Climate Action Network event, and, you know, have we given serious thought to solar? And we had given little bits and pieces of thought to solar in the past, not really extensively. And so Jay's prompt set off the usual creation of a committee, buy-in by the board, et cetera, and sort of away we went with it.
You know, we'll talk about the economics of this project, which were very compelling because of not only the pricing was, you know, very competitive, but the incentives. But in addition to the economics, and everybody wants to talk about that, were there other things that prompted you to do this? And what I'm getting at is, you know, the idea of creation care or you know, tikkun olam. If you want to, there may be some people on this call that don't know exactly what that is. So if you want to comment on that, that'd be great. Was that a factor in doing this?
Right. So I would say yes and no, meaning that that there was no primary motivator. Okay, this situation, because of the amount of work, not that it was enormous, but you have to put work into it. It's an investment by the congregation, by a nonprofit. It's time, energy, resource, etc. Because of that, all right. And I would say this is one of the takeaways for the folks on the webinar as well. You have to, I think you have to consider all of the reasons that you're doing this and be very upfront about it, okay? If it was only tikkun olam, if it was only the sort of mission and around environmental justice and what have you, and money was absolutely no object, that's one thing, but we can't afford that, okay? We can't afford to say we're going to spend $160,000 just only because it's the right thing to do. You know, we here in Massachusetts have the benefit of having state incentives that will help us to do the right thing and to make it economically feasible. So between state incentives and the great offers and projections that were created by potential installers, we saw that we could sort of have our cake and eat it too. We could, in fact, do the right thing. We could save a lot of cost as a result, and actually in the long term, it's a no-brainer from the perspective of cash flows. And so for us, it was easy. We didn't have to think hard about this. We just had to make the decision to put our energy into it and get it done.
Right. So, I mean, the economics are clearly at the top of the list, it sounds like. It had to be compelling for this to make sense. Yes. Was there also an element of, maybe you went in thinking this, or you found it as, you know, you went through the process, was there a community building component to all of this?
Yeah.
You formed a committee. It took 1.5 years to do, at most 1.5 years. I mean, were there other benefits that you saw that this helped build a stronger community?
Right.
Was that
so here's an interesting thing.
Okay.
And again, I'm speaking to the webinar participants. If you guys are successful, all right, if everyone on this call is successful, you will be successful in doing something that, in essence, no one will ever experience. It's an odd thing, okay? But you will have stuff on your roof. Maybe in certain cases, you won't even be able to see it. In our case, for example, we have a flat roof and it's pretty tall, and so most people can't see the solar panels. So in our case, you can't see it, you can't experience it, you can't hear it, you can't know it, that it's there, all right? But this amazing thing is going on, in essence, in the background, all right? It's saving us enormous amounts of money. It's doing the right thing in terms of being a constant clean generator of electricity, all right? Last year, we avoided carbon to the extent of about 1,000 trees, okay? So it's as if every person in the congregation went out and, planted collectively 1,000 trees, okay? But in essence, no one did anything, okay, aside from buy into this fantastic idea of going ahead and putting up solar panels. And so this is a long-winded way, Matt, of saying that you guys have the opportunity to make of this what you want to make of it. You can emphasize economics. You can emphasize doing the right thing. You can use it as a learning experience for your congregation. You can market it for your congregation. You can engage with potential donors. You can engage with younger people who, by and large, have more of an environmental justice impetus than older people do. You can do a number of different things with this, all the while, hopefully, having made an investment that will pay off for you. It's just, for us, the biggest no-brainer ever.
So it sounds like that there has to be some, you have to get consensus on a project like this. And, you know, the reason why I'm asking is, you know, hopefully as the people who will watch this, you know, they'll be from, you know, a congregation somewhere else in the country or some other nonprofit, and maybe they're at the beginning of the process. And they're just wondering, what am I kind of in for? You know, how big of a hurdle is this? So, would you talk to us a little bit more about, you know, getting consensus from your community? Was it hard? Was it easy?
Yeah.
Were there challenges about that? And how important was that? You know, once the solar committee was founded, was it like, oh, we're doing this, you know, we're doing this? Or was it,
right?
You know, how difficult was it? Or was it difficult at all?
Yeah. So,
and how much time did you spend on it, Michael? Sorry to interrupt. And how much of your time was spent on it? You know, and where was your time spent?
Yeah. No, all really important questions for nonprofits, and especially for communal institutions, Jewish or non-Jewish or what have you. I think up front, it's really critically important to recognize the scope of the project and have people involved in it that understand how to get things done at your nonprofit. All right. Now, like I said before, we only have 2 full-time employees, which means that in essence, all the volunteers are doing everything. If some of you folks out there have a professional staff, then you know it's a different kind of dynamic. But for those of us that don't have a lot of resource within our nonprofits, then it's critically important to have the right people involved with this, so that you can maintain the credibility of the people who are involved in the nonprofit, and so that you can, in essence, make it happen politically through your institution. I probably underestimated the time that would be involved in getting buy-in from people within the congregation who were in positions of authority and power. I was not the president at the time. I was a board member, but it was in essence a volunteer. And I thought that I was doing the right amount of bringing people along, especially president and board, bringing people along in the process, keeping them up to date, involving them and so forth. But I probably should have involved them even more than I did. So Matt, you asked how much time did it take? The majority, I would say, of my time was spent internally in terms of getting this through the congregational board, making sure the right people signed off and so forth. Because of fantastic contractors like Bob Clark of 621 Energy, he did all of the heavy lifting once we were able to get through that process, okay? And so my recommendation, don't underestimate the buy-in that you need to get from within your entities in order to move forward with a project. And so one way of doing that, I would suggest, is upfront, very early on, talk with others in your city, in your neighborhood, you know, close by, who have gone through a project like this one. Learn from them about the dynamics, especially on the finance side, and bring that internally very early on in your process, so that people can start to get comfortable with the financial dynamics, with the commitment of the congregation or the nonprofit in general, and you know, try to get through that hurdle as quickly as possible, so that you can get onto the sort of harder, or not harder work, but the ongoing work of evaluating proposals, choosing contractors, etc.
So communicate often and early with your, you know, if it's your board or whoever's on the committee,
Yeah.
That's important. And we're going to talk about financing more in a little bit, and that's really important. One other question though regarding this: what were and were there any objections and concerns internally? And if people were, let's say they were skeptical, or there's just objections in general, what were they, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, I would say let's focus on two things, and I think that by and large there were no objections. Okay, so I'm having to dig a little bit, but let's say two things. All right, one was simply the unknown. People, and I count myself amongst them. When you've never had experience with something personally or professionally, you just don't know what's going to transpire. You know, Matt, you talked before about the fact that Collective Sun, from a contractual standpoint, owns the solar panels and is responsible for maintenance. Okay, well, how much maintenance is there, right? Oh, you know, is there a lot or is there a little? How much do I have to worry about that? You know, so it's all these sort of unknowns that I would say people expressed. Oh, there are projections for how much power we're going to generate. What if they're wrong? Are the, you know, if they're wrong, is it going to be wrong by 2%, 20%, 80%? You know, so again, the more that you can engage with people in your area who've done similar types of projects, I think that you can take those kinds of things off the table early, the fear of the unknown. So that's number one. Number two is on the financing side, all right? On the financing side, we had a good idea early on about the rough numbers that it was going to come in at. And no one was flinching, but then again, no one was certain about how we were going to finance it either, okay? We could finance it out of the cash coffers. We could finance it partially out of cash coffers. We could finance it in a number of different ways. There was fear very early on about using our own cash. And so, you know, that took a lot of time to get through. Just, again, the sort of fear, uncertainty, and doubt aspect of the financing side. So those are the two that I would bring to your attention.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I think let's move a little bit to the financing. And just to, you know, again,
Matt,
just say,
sorry to interrupt. Someone asked about a traditional power purchase agreement. That was one of the financing options that we considered. Okay, but by and large, what the implication of that is that your return will be lower. Okay, now your cash outlay will be lower, but so will your return be lower. Okay, and so that is a decision for the individual nonprofit very much to make, which is, why are we doing this? Okay, if we get a financial benefit of $1,000 a year, is that good enough for us? Okay, maybe it is. Maybe some people will say it is. Maybe some people will say it isn't. Okay, for us, we saw the options and we thought, no, we believe that we can get a greater payback and be comfortable with that, not by going with the PPA, but by, you know, in essence, owning it ourselves. And so again, it's a spectrum issue. Different institutions, different nonprofits will come out on different parts of that comfort spectrum of less quote unquote risk in terms of owning it, but less payback versus more and more.
Yeah, and we expect a nonprofit, all nonprofits, you know, to pursue any financing that's reasonable. And for the people on the call that may not know what a power purchase agreement is, and then you'll hear it called a PPA. Basically, it's a zero down option where you just buy the energy that's produced by the panels on your roof, and you know that rate is defined. You know, there's a certain number you buy it at, but it's zero down. Typically 20 years. That's not what Congregation Shaarei Tefillah did in their case, but it sounds like that was proposed. And when you do go out and get quotes, your contractors will present lots of different funding options. So to talk specifically about how you funded your project, Collective Sun was involved. We gave a 12% discount, so you only had to raise 88% of the money. We own it, and at the end of the 6th year, I didn't mention this earlier, but at the end of the 6th year, ownership transfers back to you. So during that 6-year process, we own it while we monetize the tax credit.
Yes.
So you had to raise the 88%, and
Yes.
there's lots of ways to do that. I mentioned values aligned lenders, mission aligned lenders, there's crowd lending, there's traditional lenders.
Yeah.
Michael, would you mind sharing and basically not only how you did it, but the different options you looked at?
Right, right. So we considered all of the options. I'll cut to the chase.
Yep.
Three congregants made loans of $40,000 apiece to make about $120,000. The last $40,000 was taken out of the synagogue cash account. So again, one loan by three different people, $40,000 apiece at 2.5%. Interest rate. Okay, so let me let that sink in for a minute. A $40,000 loan, 2.5% interest. Okay, that was so in essence it was an insider loan, and we have a mortgage that is approximately 3%. The mortgage was somewhere on the order of 3.5% at a certain point, but in essence between 3 and 4%. As everyone knows, the interest rate environment has been extremely low over the past number of years. And because we were able to find these insiders who were able and interested to lend the money, and they were willing to do so at a favorable rate. Now that favorable rate, FYI, is actually determined by the IRS. Meaning that the lowest rate is determined by the IRS, and as long as you comply with that, then you're fine. Now, just from a lender perspective, okay, for those three families who lent the money, go out and try to find any bond these days that will give you 2.5% for, I think it's 7 years, even taxable. Pretty hard to find. Okay, so it was not only a win for the congregation, it was actually even a win for the lenders. Okay, even at a favorable rate. Okay, let me take the human element of this also, which is you folks on the webinar have an opportunity to engage with your stakeholders, all right, in a different kind of way around solar. All right. Number one, it makes sense for our congregation from a financial and a payback standpoint. Okay, so that's amazing. Number two, it makes sense in terms of green energy and clean energy. And in Massachusetts, there are a lot of incentives to do that. Okay. Number three, you can engage with potential funders within your entities. All right. On a marketing basis, where you can say to them, look at the fantastic opportunity that we have here, and we'd be interested in talking with you around the potential insider loan where you can get a payback personally as well, and it would benefit us. And finally, it gets people more, shall we say, bought in to your entity. All right, I think our rabbi has said on a number of occasions that you love what you nurture, right? And so this is a part of the nurturing of your individual nonprofit, okay? So you see that this is the financing, although it looms large, it's also an opportunity to engage with people as well.
So what was the term? You mentioned 7 years on that, Michael. Thanks for that.
Yep.
And you said 2.5%, which is a below market rate, which is excellent. What was the term? You mention 7 years? Was that what you remember the term length?
Yeah. It was
okay.
it was 7 or 8 years. I'm forgetting, but I think it was around that. Why 7 or 8 years? Specifically because, again, this is specific to us here in Massachusetts with the incentive structure that it is and so forth. We have a payback period of 7 or 8 years on this project. Okay, It is a self-financing project. The cash flows on a per year basis finance this project. We can pay back the lenders. We can pay for the whatever power we do have to buy from the power company here in Boston, Eversource, and therefore we can pay this all off in 7 years period of time. After which we own this infrastructure and everything is cream on the cake, so to speak. We are actually making money for, you know, as many years after that as we are in business, so to speak. Okay, Matt, sorry to slight aside. I wanted to bring this chart to everyone's attention. Again, Bob Clark of 621 Energy created this chart, and this shows two things. It shows a number of things, but specifically two things. It shows our energy use over time. And again, a good contractor will create this type of chart for all of you guys who are entertaining solar projects. And so it shows our energy use over time using a year's worth of electricity bills for the year that preceded the implementation of our project. So the blue columns show our energy use. Here in the Boston area, we have an interesting dynamic where we do use you know, air conditioning, of course, and you see that in the summer months. But because we have, you know, pretty cold winters and pretty long winters, you see that we're using quite a bit of electricity even in the wintertime, especially in the wintertime. Now that is a little bit opposite to, of course, our solar generation. Our solar generation is such that, of course, during the spring and you know, summer months, we're generating a whole bunch of electricity. And thus we still have to purchase electricity from Eversource, from the power company, but at various times, of course, at night, etc. But the bottom line is that we projected to save approximately $10,000, or maybe $10,000 to $12,000 in electricity savings. Just by using solar panels, we would be paying for $12,000 less in electricity. And in the Boston area, we have incentives from the electric company of $10,000 per year in our case. All right, so it was a cash flow of something like $20,000 to $25,000 per year cash flow in. Cash flow out is about $20,000 per year. So that's what I mean by a self-financing project.
Yeah, Michael, the economics of this project were extremely compelling, I mean, across the board. And that's thanks to Massachusetts incentive program. And, you know, we work across the country. You know, utility rates vary, installations actually costs vary quite a bit depending on where you are. You had, like I think I mentioned earlier, that you had, you know, the cost of the system was very competitive. But, you know, I'm glad you brought this slide up, because for the folks that are on the call and thinking about solar, you know, contractors, or we in some cases, we get your usage data, how much energy you're using, direct from the utility. Now, each utility is a little bit different, but lots of them will provide in 15-minute intervals exactly how much you use throughout the year.
We have that data also, by the way. In
Massachusetts, most of the utilities, you know, there's some municipal utilities that's a little more difficult to get it from, but you had it. And so this kind of information is really easy to get these days. And these projections are, you know, this is what you're going to want to have to make a decision. And Michael, I do want to talk more about the, you know, the selection process with the contractors, but I do have a follow-up question on just the loan, you know, and then, well, on the funding. Had you not had access to a few internal investors, and I'll call them impact investors, because that's essentially what they are to us. Would you have looked at other possibilities? And just to mention, you know, we work a lot. We'll work with 6% interest, you know, over a 20-year term, and those pencil across the country. When I say pencil, the cash flow positive. So let's say you save $10,000 a year, but you have a 20-year loan that happens to be 6%, you know, which is much higher than, you know, that's not an impact investment, or in some cases actually could be. But anyway, that's a higher interest rate. You get a $10,000, you save $10,000 a year, but your loan is $9,000 a year. So there's, you know, $1,000 delta. So you save $1,000 a year. And so we would call that cash flow positive. Did you set, two questions. Did you set sort of a bar and say, look, we just have to be cash flow positive at a minimum? And so number one. Number two, would you have considered, you know, different options like refining the mortgage to do this project?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great question.
So two questions there.
Reminds me that I didn't fully answer your question earlier about what were the various things that we considered. Broad brush, we considered everything, meaning we considered power purchase agreement, we considered refinancing our mortgage, we considered paying it at our most cash-rich time, which generally tends to be in the fall, paying it all out of cash. We considered, I think there were maybe one or two other things, and so in essence, everything was on the table for us. We didn't rule out anything from at the very beginning. I would say that once we saw that it was a self-financing project from the cash flow standpoint, that it wasn't, I would say it wasn't a no-brainer because some people were still nervous, but it became much, much easier to simply pull the trigger on the simplest approach, which was this internal funding option. That we knew that there were going to be a couple of people who had the kind of personal resources that they could do this, and they would be interested. And so once that's the case, then there's nothing stopping us from just going ahead and doing that. And that was the simplest thing. We did consider refinancing the mortgage. We kind of ruled that out because we are on track to make the mortgage expire. All right. And we'd like to, for the purpose of cash flow in the future, we'd like to, pay less going into the future. And so, this bottom line for us, this was the simplest thing in the end, but we did consider everything. Also, Matt, I think it's important to note that about sort of the contractor process. We talked with 5 different contractors at the very beginning. I talked with 5 different contractors, and I brought it to the committee that I had pulled together. And we were able to whittle that down to 3. And with those 3, we were able to really get into the nitty-gritty, and it very rapidly got to 2 quickly, and then we settled on 1. One thing that I've said to many people, which I think personally is very important, is that not all solar contractors will take the time to go up on your roof to make the measurements that are necessary to see that there might be setbacks or other things on your roof that prevent certain types of deployment of the panels. And we were insistent that the finalists needed to go up on the roof in order to take those measurements so that we could reduce the amount of uncertainty going into the ultimate congregational meeting that was required to sign off on this project. Matt, did I miss anything else?
No, that's great. I'm glad you moved to the conversation of the contractors. I have some questions on that. And real quick though, there was a question from Art on the remaining 88%. I think we answered your question. If not, just chime back in on the Q&A. And I'm glad, like I said, I'm glad you moved to this contractor question. So you got 5 quotes, got it down to 3. And, I remember you've mentioned a couple of times in our previous conversations that it was really important to get up on the roof. And that is important because you will potentially discover things that you may not see, from a satellite image. And I know Bob from 621 did that, or someone from his company did. Mm-hmm. Now, with, I actually want to ask, because of COVID, a lot of stuff is done remotely. Were you comfortable?
Remotely and from the outside, okay?
And from the outside, yeah, going there, yeah. So eventually they would come out. For the initial pass, and I'm asking this kind of for the benefit of the contractors, so that they, for their sales process. Were you comfortable with a first pass with a completely remote analysis where they say, look, we have satellite images, we can actually do a remote shading analysis, and we're going to do a basic layout?
Yes.
And then we have your energy usage. If everything goes perfectly and we don't see anything when we get up on the roof, this is what your system will look like. For that very first pass, were you comfortable with that? And as long as they said, hey, but we're still going to come out and look at your service panel. We're going to look at how we're going to run the conduit, but just as, an estimate, would that give you the comfort that you need to get through the vendor selection process from 5 to 3 and so they can get their foot in the door? Or do you want them to come out right away?
Yeah. No, for sure, we were comfortable with that, and that's exactly what happened with the 5. Okay. The caveat here, and again, this is to the contractors on the call. The caveat here, of course, is that if you have a concern about being ruled out of that process, meaning not making the short list, then it's your call about whether you want to make the effort. Personally, I think it's quite worth it for you. Meaning you can spend an hour on the roof, and you can say, look, folks, right, to the potential purchaser. Look, folks, I was up on your roof. I saw a number of things. I don't know whether my competition has done so, but I can, tell you the following, and act in a consultative manner, right? So yeah. I think that would give you a leg up as a contractor.
Was there a big difference between the contractors' quotes in terms of price, big variety, wide range, and just and the system selection? And I mean the components. Did you see a big difference?
Of the 5, the 2 that were this is a sort of classic normal curve thing that you often see if you get enough quotes, and we got enough quotes with 5. Okay, that there were 2 outliers. Okay, so it was very easy to rule them out. It was either an outlier by price, or it was an outlier in terms of the initial system size or what they were interested in doing. So I think one of them, for example, said, well, we think your system size should be this, not this, and that's what we're bidding on. We're not going to bid anything more than that. Right. And so we said, well, why? And there didn't seem to be a good reason. So in any case, of the 5, the 2 took themselves out of it based on some degree of being outliers. The remaining 3 were quite close. Quite close.
Okay. Just curious, was 621 the least expensive?
No, but I'm serious about them being so close. They were so not disparate, right? They were so close that I couldn't tell you whether I bought the cheapest one or the most expensive one, because it was in the rounding error. So
yeah. I mean, I could tell by the price is very competitive. The point I'm trying to make there is that you don't always go with the lowest cost system. And that's to the benefit of the contractors on the call.
Yeah.
No. You don't. Sometimes you do. Sometimes it happens to be the lowest cost bid, but that's not always the case.
Yes.
What were you told, and then what did you kind of run with as an assumption for the lifetime of the system? Because we own it for 6 years and we're responsible for 6 years, but then ownership does transfer to you, and then maintenance would transfer to you. So, what were you told as far as the total lifetime? How long will the system will last, and what are you counting on?
Right. So I wish Bob could be on this as well, because he'll keep me honest. But we were looking, at a 20-year time frame as the time frame in which we could be convinced that we had benefited, from the system. I believe that the system is rated for closer to 30 years. But again, when you're talking with your congregation and when you're talking with people about what the expectations are, you want to, I think, by and large, set expectations conservatively. You say, look, I've heard 30 from the contractor, or maybe I've heard 40, or what have you, right? But if we can do this, make it work in 20, all right, then everything else beyond that is fantastic, and get everyone to sort of buy into that approach. So our system, I believe, is rated around 30. The panels degrade in terms of their energy production output. I think 1% a year, a certain amount per year. And so, that of course is just, it gets incorporated into the projections that get done. And so I guess the bottom line is the lifespan is probably closer to 30 years.
And thanks for that, Michael. David actually asked a question in the Q&A, so that was, regarding that. So I just want to comment on that. You know, the lifetime of the system. I mean, the panels have a 25-year warranty from the manufacturer. Inverters, so there's two main components in a system. You have solar modules or solar panels, and then an inverter, which takes the DC energy from the panel, converts it to AC.
Yeah.
Then you have a bunch of balance of system. You have racking and wiring in between all of that. Now, 25 years on the panels. The inverter typically has a 10 to 12-year warranty. We extend that to 20. There's a cost to do that, but you know that's included. You know, it's a pass-through. Now, you know, David, I'm just going to read your question because it's a good one. Michael, did you evaluate the systems from the different contractors on the different efficiency ratings? And was there a trade of cost versus generation capability? And so you mentioned a 1% decline in panels. That might be a little high. A lot of times it's, you know, half a point, 0.5 to 0.75. So each panel change is a little bit different in the decrease over year. And some are a little bit more efficient. Maybe some will produce better in harder weather and things like that. At the end of the day, how important was that to your decision making?
Yeah. So to this, the question specifically, did we evaluate systems with different efficiency ratings? The answer is yes. Yeah. But the efficiency ratings did not loom large. Okay, meaning that Bob ran a number of scenarios for us. Yep. We took a look, and they were not defining factors. They were sort of not in the weeds, but they were in the, okay, we have to make a call. You know, what's the relative payback? What's the real degree of uncertainty or what have you? You know, we made the call. It was not one of those major factors that, you know, we were making ourselves crazy over, and it was a really hard decision. There were other things that loomed larger. The layout, if I remember correctly, there were a number of layout possibilities on the roof that varied to some extent. And also, by the way, in Massachusetts, because of the incentive structure from Eversource and the way that the Commonwealth has created it, there are different blocks of power generation, okay, as well. And so we were juggling layout of the panels, the numbers of the different block options in terms of which block we would fall into based on how much power we generated, et cetera. Those things were much bigger issues than the specific efficiency ratings of the panels. So it may or may not be that way in New York. I can't, you know, I can't say.
Thanks for that, Michael. And we're actually getting close on time, and there's still a couple follow-up questions. David, you have a couple good ones. I also have a couple other questions I wanted to ask. And David, we're going to answer your follow-up questions. Just a review of the project itself. Were there things that you learned in the process, you know, and maybe you would have done differently, you know, that just taking a year, look back at the past year and a half, are the things you wish you knew earlier that you could share, Michael? Yeah,
from an execution standpoint, I can tell you without a doubt the answer is no. Okay, meaning that our contractor came through in a huge way for us, and we just did an annual summary of what was projected to be produced and saved, and what we actually did produce and save. And I got to tell you that they matched like almost exactly. All right. So from an execution standpoint, I would say that there were very few lessons learned, other than make sure that you find a good contractor with good references that you have a good relationship with and are comfortable with, right? So that always makes sense. In terms of other lessons learned, though, I guess it mostly has to do with the internal lessons learned, right? All of the classic internal nonprofit, I'm going to say politics, but it's really all about you acting as the fiduciary of your nonprofit so that you can stand up in front of people and say, I've done all of my due diligence appropriately. I've shared that in a transparent manner. I've engaged with the people who are responsible for this nonprofit, and we are in this together, right? That's, in my mind, critically important to establish as quickly as possible so that there are no surprises later.
Yeah, and you know, what I've learned over the years of working with nonprofits and doing this is that largely there's a lot of volunteers, right, doing the heavy lifting on this. And, nobody wants to make the wrong decision, right? They pick a contractor it doesn't work out because there's reputational harm with that, right, within your own community. And that's not a good outcome. If something goes wrong, so, doing your due diligence, getting references, having this selection process and being transparent about it, that seems to lead to good project outcomes. And that seems like that's what happened here, Michael.
Yeah.
So we're running out of time. There's only a few more questions, and I want to get through this. David, your questions, and also before that, would you mind just, you and I talked before this, and you mentioned that, you learned about Collective Sun, and we did this 12% off coupon, discount, and we own the system. You get it back at the end of the 6th year, and you mentioned that, hey, that sounded great, but you had to go through your own due diligence on us, and we present it as kind of a simple sort of transaction, and it just happens. But what was your experience?
Right.
And I'm sure you would have done this with any third-party provider,
Right.
but what was your experience going through that, and what did you learn?
Yeah, so let me answer that by making a contrast. On our solar committee, we actually had a guy who's an engineer for HVAC systems. And so we had built-in technical knowledge around solar such that brought a lot of credibility. If we didn't have that person, if we didn't have that expertise, it's entirely possible that we would have brought on someone from the outside who might have acted as a technical expert, so to speak, to augment ours and to make sure that we could speak credibly to the congregation about this is the second largest investment that the congregation has made in its history. Okay, so now let's go to the finance side. On the finance side, yes, we have lawyers, okay, within the congregation, and that's fine. But when it came to concluding a contract with Collective Sun, we needed to do our due diligence as the fiduciaries of the congregation to make sure that we understood how the contract worked, okay? And there's some complexity there. It was worth it because the amount of money that we were going to save as a result was a material sum. Collective Sun also has an interesting benefit because Collective Sun is the formal contractual owner, okay? They actually hold Bob Clark's feet to the fire when it comes to the infrastructure as well. Although I love Bob dearly and trust him implicitly, nevertheless, Collective Sun has done these types of situations many, many times over. And so in essence, for you guys who haven't gone down this road yet, you could consider Collective Sun a partner of yours in exercising their knowledge of contractors and how things should be done. So we went out and we brought in an attorney who was familiar with solar financing from lots of other deals. He actually was not familiar with Collective Sun, but he was able to read their contractual language, get fully comfortable with it, interact with us. That cost us on the order of $2,500, okay? That was $2,500 very well spent because again, I could stand up in front of the congregation and say that I did my due diligence to make sure that this deal was right.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And, just if someone's tuning in a little bit late, Bob Clark is from 621 Energy, and he was a contractor on this. And when, Michael says, hold his feet to the fire, we own the system. So we would work with Bob, if there were any, any maintenance had to be done. So that's who Bob Clark is. So Michael, thanks again for that. We, as Collective Sun, we expect all nonprofits to do their own due diligence. We're transparent, and we go through the contracts with everybody, early on in the process or whenever is the most appropriate for them. And we're always happy to do that. And my contact information is there, and I can help with that. Two last questions, and with 2 minutes over time here. And David, thanks for these. battery storage, Michael. Did that come up at all?
Very briefly, and
Yeah.
we didn't consider it as part of our scope.
And, we are doing battery storage. We're looking for battery storage projects. There are reasons where it really makes a lot of sense. Sometimes it's for some sort of to power some emergency services. Still, it's not really, it's really price prohibitive at this point, to back up your entire synagogue, right? That would be a very big total cost. But, we are doing storage. We like storage. And nonprofits are, a lot of them are considering that. One last question, and if anybody has a last minute Q&A question, please chime in. Was community solar on your radar? Did that come across at all, Michael? Was that an option?
It was, but not seriously considered, not because we didn't think it was necessarily a good idea, but we had plenty on our plate already. And we kind of just, again, from a cash flow perspective, it looked like we could do this relatively simply. So we didn't consider it seriously.
Yeah, and you have a good roof. There's lots of kind of smaller arrays positioned around, but a good roof, very compelling incentives. And, you had to find a way to fund it. And you worked with us for part of it, but, the economics really worked out.
Yes. One last comment, if I may, about our roof. We rebuilt our synagogue in 2010. We actually built on a new. We acquired the property next door to us in 2010. We built a new synagogue structure and so forth. And so we had the benefit of being able to. Thanks for bringing up that picture. So we had the benefit, if you can see, of the top right. All right, you see that big field of solar panels. We had the benefit of having just a beautiful, beautiful, field waiting to be populated with solar panels. If you look down at the bottom of the picture, where there's a lighter colored roof, you can see the oldest part of the synagogue roof structure, and you can see there that it wasn't flat. That was at an angle, facing mostly east and west to your left and right, and south down to the bottom. Bottom line is, the way that one of my pitches to the congregation was, hey, we've got this fantastic field sitting up on top of our heads, waiting to be populated with solar panels, and we can do something great here and make it pay for us, the congregation, do the right thing around the environment, and it's relatively straightforward. So especially because it's new infrastructure. So for us, that was great. Don't know whether everyone else on the call, has that combination of factors.
And when you say the field, you're referring to the darker part of the roof, and that's just a big open space. It's actually perfect for solar. Yeah. But most of this you probably can't see. I would imagine.
The only part that you can see is the part on the lower part of the photo. You cannot see any of it. Pretty much. Maybe on the second floor of one of our neighbors, but that's about it.
Okay. Great. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Michael? I think we're wrapping up here. We're a bit over time.
I'll summarize. For us, this was maybe the biggest no-brainer ever, in terms of the financials. Did it take my time? Yes, it took my time. Did I believe in this project from the beginning? Yes. And is it coming to fruition in terms of the benefits that we're getting out of it? Yes, absolutely. And so, the mission of being able to do the right thing around clean energy, yes, that was a motivator for me. Just as much a motivator was the financial side and the idea that I could do something that was going to have a 20 to 30 or maybe even more year legacy that people will benefit from for a long time to come.
Michael, thank you. Thank you for your time. It was great to work with you. The community on this project.
And everyone should feel free to be in touch if you're interested in reaching out to me directly.
Reach out to Michael. Also reach out to Rabbi Katie. Her information was at the very beginning of the webinar, and feel free to reach out to me as well. And I think that wraps it up. Thank you very much.
Great. Take care all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.